Hey, y'all, I'm excited about today's podcast because I got to interview an actor named Dean Butler, who is also an author and a producer. I had a really interesting conversation with Dean Butler, and I thought for sure we're just mostly going to talk about his book and Little House on the Prairie, but we did not. We talked about a lot of really interesting topics, and that makes it more interesting for me too. We got to hear about Michael Landon and what a visionary he was and how he got Little House on the Prairie made, and what his thoughts were about how to resolve the ending after he had this successful run for so many years. And I can tell that Dean really respected him. And so I hope you enjoy my interview with actor, author, producer, Dean Butler. Welcome to my podcast, where I'll be speaking with guests candidly about interesting topics. So join me on Candid with Kimbra. Today, my very special guest is Dean Butler, and Dean is, I guess, the most known for being on Little House on the Prairie, right? And I know you've talked about this a million times. So, and then your great book that you had last year. Is it The Prairie or A Prairie?
Well, it's actually Prairie Man.
Sorry, I got that wrong.
My Little House Life and Beyond.
Yeah, and I did skim through it actually, but I just messed up the title. So Prairie Man.
Yes.
But I was going to tell you, Dean, I didn't have the honor of viewing Little House on the Prairie when I was growing up. But I did discover it afterwards during the pandemic, actually, because one of my aunts was really into this show and just cozy TV in general, right? And
exactly. No, exactly. A lot of people, Kimbra, rediscovered the program during the pandemic. I think people were looking for comfort wherever they could find it. And Little House has traditionally been a source of comfort for viewers. So yeah, it's not surprising it had a major resurgence during those years. Now, it's always been there. It's never been off the air. It still airs in over 100 countries around the world every day in 40 languages. It is a staple of family television viewing. It has been called many times the finest family drama in the history of television. It is a very special program in its total embodiment of the story, the kinds of stories it tells, which are about family, community, love, acceptance, grace, dignity. It's all woven together in this little town of Walnut Grove. Mm-hmm. That when Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote her book, she didn't even talk about Walnut Grove. But this is where they lived, on the banks of Plum Creek. Well, Walnut Grove had a very romantic sound to it. Mm-hmm. when they were trying to decide where to set the program. And in a television series, they needed to set it in one place. The Ingalls moved all over, but the show needed to be set in one place for the cost of production, the building of sets, that all of those things that you need to be thinking about. So Walnut Grove was the place. And I think it was a great decision because Walnut Grove has this sort of idyllic, romantic sound to it. And you feel like it's a warm, welcoming place, Walnut Grove. It just has that. Now, there were no walnut trees in our Walnut Grove. I don't know about the real Walnut Grove, but in our Walnut Grove, there were no walnut trees. A lot of California live oak. We shot out in Simi Valley. Right. The exteriors were shot out in Simi Valley at the historic Big Sky Movie Ranch location, which has been the home to hundreds of television shows, movies, commercials. It is 7,500 acres of untouched land that is there for producers to come in and build their world. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's right on the outskirts of Los Angeles. It's literally, it's right out the 118 freeway off the 405. You go west and it's like, 20 miles away.
Now, Dean, do you still use that set a lot? Because
the set's gone.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, the set was that's a whole other story, Kimbra, where the sets were taken down when the show was over because the requirement, and it was owned by the Getty Oil Company then, but the contract with the Getty Oil Company was that the land had to be returned to its original state. when the program was over. And it was a wise decision. People run cattle there, and people walk and run and ride motorcycles through this area. They're not supposed to, but they do. And so you don't want to have people getting injured going into these sets, and the floor, the boards break and someone gets injured. And so it all had to be removed. And that, Kimbra, became that reality informed the decision of how the series' final episode was crafted, and an episode called The Last Farewell, where the town of Walnut Grove was blown up by the residents because the land was purchased by a disreputable land speculator, and he was going to turn the town into a corporate town.
Right.
It was a stretch in terms of the viability of that, but it gave Michael the opportunity to write a story where the town could come to an end. And I think when he really wanted it to come to an end, when it was over, he didn't want to get a call from NBC in a year, 2 years saying, let's do a movie. Let's do a couple of, he wanted it to be over. And I think it was a very wise decision. You could never go back to that place in the same way ever again. Even if you'd left it there, it just would never have been the same.
He was a smart businessman, such a smart producer, to have that kind of success. I know last year was 2024 was the 50th anniversary of the show. Well, how long in total did it run, though?
So it ran for 9 full seasons.
Okay.
And then a 10th abbreviated season where we closed up the series with 3 movies, the third of which was The Last Farewell, which put the button on the series.
Got it. But you were on like 1979 to 1983, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So I was on the last 5 seasons. I came in season 6 to be the love interest for Laura Ingalls, who was played so memorably by Melissa Gilbert. And I was brought in to be that guy. And everybody who knew the books, I don't know, Kimbra, have you ever read the Little House books?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, no.
And I was an English major too. I didn't read them.
I recommend them. They are a very sweet read. They really are. I mean, they are so pure and clean in terms of just the life was so basic and simple. And they lived every day to get to the next day. Wow. And that's what you get in these books, and that's what Michael captured in the series, and I think people have responded to it so beautifully because of that through the years, because it's simple and basic and very uncomplicated.
Yeah, when life was simple, like so unlike it is today, with like.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I started to answer your question. So I came in season 6 to be this character, Almanzo Wilder.
Right,
we pronounced his name Almanzo Wilder incorrectly. One of the few overt mistakes that was so made. Funny. I had nothing to do with that thing, but I accepted it because that's what was being said. But it wasn't until years later in 2008, I was in Malone, New York, shooting at Almanzo Wilder's childhood farm. So these are all real people. This is all, these are all real people. They lived in real places. There was a recording of Laura Ingalls Wilder. It was on a CD. It was 27 seconds long. That's all the recorded material that existed of her. But the CD was called Laura Speaks. And at the end of the 27-second clip, she talked about the man of the house, Almanzo. So we've been saying for years, Almanzo. She said Almanzo. I've been told in letters for years that we'd been saying it wrong, but there was nothing I could do about that. But I'm converted to Almanzo now. Now he's Almanzo.
That's so funny because I asked my producer, I said, because I heard you say Almanzo on an interview, and then I've heard other people say Almanzo. So I was like, is it Almanzo or Almanzo? And now you're clarifying.
It's, like Cole Porter, tomato, potato. Almanzo, Almanzo. It's all the same thing.
Yeah, well, that's good. I'm glad you clarified that. And there was a funny question that I thought of when you were talking a few minutes ago, but did you recognize in Melissa Gilbert that drive when you knew her as a teenager that she was going to one day run for the SAG president? Did you?
Well, there's no question that, look, I don't think I would have speculated about SAG, but there's no doubt early on in meeting Melissa, this was someone with a lot of drive and a lot of capability to do different things. She was very focused, very oriented to success. She was surrounded by a great team of agents and managers who ran that career with her and her mother. So when Melissa ran for the Screen Actors Guild presidency, it was not surprising to me at all. And because she's so well known in the industry, it was not surprising at all that she won. So, when she ran for Congress in Michigan, years after being in SAG, she made the decision to run for Congress. And she called me to let me know. She was calling everybody she knew, looking for that initial trove of donations that would launch a campaign.
Sure.
And, I thought, well, absolutely. This is who you are. You are a leader. Melissa is very, very compelling. When she tells you something, I don't know, do you know Melissa at all? Have you ever met her?
I've never met her. I've just seen her on interviews.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and she does a great interview. Melissa has a way of making the things that are important to her important to anybody who's listening. She has this gift. She when she believes in something, she's willing to say so.
Good for her.
And she doesn't hedge from it. There's no sort of waffling. When she's in, she's all the way in.
She doesn't censor herself. She doesn't censor herself.
She does have a sense of herself.
Oh,
there's no question she does. Yeah. And the Screen Actors Guild thing was not a surprise.
No, what I said was she doesn't censor herself like she does.
Oh, no, that's right. Well, yes. She doesn't censor herself, and she has a very strong sense of herself. Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good rap little jingle right there.
There you go.
She seems like a really amazing person, and that I watched your guys' story a lot during. I told you when I saw it on Cozy TV, and what I wanted to ask you though, was there a lot of people that auditioned for that part that you got, or did Michael know you from somewhere else, or did he handpick you?
Yeah, no, I don't think that. I think when I first went in for this, the story I've always told is that when I went into this, there was a stack of pictures 10 inches high on the casting director's desk, and the second time I went back, the stack of pictures was 5 inches, and the third time I went back, it was 2 inches, and the last time I went back, there were 4 pictures on the table. Now, when I've had conversations with Susan Sukman, who was our casting director, she said, "No, we only read about 10 or 12 people for this." So that didn't jive with what I saw with the pictures. But if Susan said they only read 12, they read 12. And I think I was very fortunate to be represented by a very strong agent at that time at ICM. I was represented by an agent named Ina Bernstein, who represented some really great people in great careers. And I got signed by her. She signed me because I had worked with one of her clients, Stephanie Zimbalist, in a movie the week for CBS called Forever, which was based on the Judy Blume novel Forever. Do you know Judy Blume at all?
Yes, Judy Blume.
So, Judy Blume is like such an important writer, particularly for young girls,
Right.
who are looking for truth
Mm-hmm.
in the way they are experiencing their lives at that
Mm-hmm.
age. And I think she has been absolutely, she was unflagging in her willingness to be frank and honest with people.
Sure.
About with young girls, about what was going on with them and what they would experience and how they could consider responding to situations. And I just think she deserves an enormous amount of credit. It's fascinating to me that throughout Judy Blume's careers, her books have been banned from school libraries, and
I didn't know that.
No, big time. Judy was always thought of as being a very controversial writer and saying things, talking to young people, particularly young girls, young women,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that their parents were uncomfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always thought when I think about that, and of course, I grew up in a family where I could talk to my mother about anything. There was
awesome.
no topic that was off limits with my mother. My father, not so easy, not as easy to talk to, but my mother would talk about any subject. And I think about people who push back on Judy Blume, because Judy Blume's not lying to people. She's not making stuff up. I mean, she's telling fictional stories, but her fictional stories are based on, on what people go through. Mm-hmm. And they are very, I think, comforting to young girls who are dealing with a lot of different things that they're just unprepared for. Mm-hmm. And I think where Judy Blume has particular power is when you're dealing with parents who are afraid of those conversations.
Right. That's a good point.
When they don't want to have those, any parent who's willing to have that conversation is going to have no problem with Judy Blume. Because Judy Blume is not being deceptive or manipulative or any of that. Mm-hmm. She's just sharing. And what it is, Judy gives readers an opportunity and parents an opportunity. It just becomes a teaching moment. It becomes an educational moment when they're talking about all the things. I mean, look, she talked about obesity. She obviously, with Forever, she talked about, there were racial stories. In Forever, they're talking about the first sexual experience, all of that. And the character goes to Planned Parenthood, which of course will set some parents off that shouldn't be offered. But then the parents, if they were willing to have that conversation and say, well, we don't really believe in Planned Parenthood, and this is why.
Okay.
That conversation could be had.
Oh, that's true. Okay, yeah, it could open up the dialogue for that.
It opens up a dialogue.
Right.
Exactly. And I think so many things that are going on in our culture now are designed to repress dialogue. They are pushing back against we are rewriting our history. We are rolling back the reality of what America has been. And look, there's this big argument. There's a big argument that's saying that woke history, I love that, woke history is damaging America in some way, or teaches young people that America was bad. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I just don't buy that. I think what telling or sharing points of view about what happened in our history opens up conversations where young people can explore what they think about an idea. There's a moment in one of the Laura Ingalls Wilder books. There are two passages in Laura Ingalls Wilder books which are historically controversial. One takes place in the Little House on the Prairie book, where the mother, Caroline, Ma, as she's referred to in the series, talks about the fact that she hates Native Americans, that she hates Indians. Mm-hmm. She's afraid of them. She's afraid of Indians. She's afraid of what they could do to her and her daughters and all of that. Whereas Laura writes that Pa was fascinated by the Indians and accepted the Indians, and Laura was fascinated by Indian culture that she got to see living on the prairies of Kansas. But she did write that her mother had a problem with the Indians because she was afraid. Now, that the statement of being afraid has created huge problems in the sort of the that became a problem for sort of more liberal America, because they didn't like hearing that someone had a problem. Sure. But what it should have opened up with is a conversation saying, essentially, look where we've come. We understand so much more about this situation now. And we don't feel that as a culture, we don't feel this way anymore. We don't fear Native Americans anymore. Now we have to remember also, these books were written by Laura Ingalls Wilder when she was 65 years old. In the 1930s, she's writing about a time in the 1860s, 1870s, where it was a very different culture, and America was pushing across the American plains, and there was manifest destiny, and there was the sense that we're going to have all of this for America. And there wasn't a lot of concern about the people who were natively there, who had been there for centuries. There was just, we were going to push forward.
For sure.
It happened that way. There was a lot of people were hurt. There was a lot of death and misunderstanding and upset. But we went on. And I think there's, the Native Americans were treated unfairly during that time. Sure. Now, and I think one has to be able to say that. We have to be able to look at that situation and say, yeah, that was not a good thing. We can do better than that. Right.
Well, in America, we've had several periods of where certain groups were not treated fairly, but we are getting better. But we're getting better, I think.
I think we're trying to get better. Yeah. And yet I think that there's a movement in the country to turn back the clock on all that.
Yeah.
And I think it's unfortunate. I don't think, look, in the long run, no clock gets turned back. It's true. We do not go backwards. We only go forward.
That's true.
Well, so, yeah.
Even with women's rights, I mean,
I think that's a huge thing, Kimbra.
That's
a huge issue.
Yeah, we're kind of going back on that. So that's one of my things, women's rights.
I don't blame you. I don't see how anybody, I can't understand how any woman and any man who respects women could be in line with where the politics are pushing women's rights right now. Yeah. Now, look, there are clearly a lot of women who are okay with this.
Sure.
Which is surprising to me until maybe it's their daughter.
Right.
Or until, there's always going to be a pushback point on these things. But it is interesting to me that a lot of women don't have a problem with the way this is moving, or the attempt to move things backward. But I just don't think that there may be a pause, but we're not going to stop moving forward.
That's true.
Society keeps moving forward.
Progress. I mean, progress, we always move forward.
Progress is inevitable. I mean, it's part of being a human. It's part of our humanness. We are always pushing forward.
It's true.
And I think that there are fits and starts and setbacks, and there are mistakes made, and things don't necessarily go perfectly. But I think people of goodwill, if there is goodwill, ultimately we fix these things and we make it right. And I think there is a strong belief and an effort to make it right.
Yeah.
As opposed to punishing people for who they are and what they are. And
yeah,
I just don't get that. That's rolling back to another century. And
yeah,
I don't see it. as a long-term strategy that can be successful.
It's so refreshing to hear you, really talk about how you feel and what you think. And I wasn't expecting that when I was going to talk with you. But getting back to your book, Prairie Man, do you talk about any of that kind of stuff in your book, or is it mostly just about the Little House on the Prairie?
Yeah, I was Kimbra, you you asked a question and you got me started. And so no, I think we tried to not delve too deeply into that. I think we certainly talked, I think we did talk about Ma and the Indians, and we talked about on by the shores of Silver Lake,
Hmm.
a little town on the prairie, I think it was, where there was a blackface minstrel show,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that was a source of upset for people. Again, a wonderful teaching moment that we don't do those things anymore, and I think we did. I did talk about that, but I did not go.
And
I
so
did not go off deeply into these topics.
you remind me of my friend who lives down in Mexico now. He's retired, and he so passionate about politics, or political social
Yeah,
injustices. Let's just say that,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that's good. That's very good. You are very passionate, and I think that we need to have more dialogue, between the two sides, because we get so in our little, our little.
There
I
was a
know,
time when you could have a civil conversation with
right,
someone you disagreed with,
right,
and it would, and who disagreed with you, and it could be okay.
right.
Unfortunately, that is a very hard space to get to today because we are so, I think
Divided.
yeah, well, I think I'd say I really think that social media is really the major culprit here, in that there is no standard, there is no curating, there's no, everyone can just say what they think. And of course, look, there's a whole spectrum of our belief, but in a more traditional media environment, the things that were said were curated.
Right.
So that, and look, that's been a huge point of pushback for people who don't like what was curated. They
Sure.
didn't like the progressive thinking that was pure, that was curating the news or public of in our perceptions about what's going on. So, in a very real sense, we have a more we have a more honest dialogue now that goes on because it is raw now.
True.
We are right down at the core of where people think. And on social media, of course, you can pop off on any subject essentially anonymously and say anything you want. And the way social media is designed, you get back more of what you're saying. So whatever you're looking for,
That's
it will
true.
give you.
Your silo, right?
Our silos. We
Yeah.
are all in our silos, and it it's a very challenging time for us because we're not getting on a mass level balanced perspective anymore. We
True.
get one side and we get the other side, and there's very little because all the energy is on the edges.
Right. Right.
The
I totally
passion
agree.
is on the edges, and that's what we get. But people live in the middle.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree.
We live center left, center right, but we live in the middle for the most part. The activists don't, but
Right.
most people live in the middle.
That's true. I would definitely agree with that. I'm kind of a middle. I mean, I agree. I'm not. I'm very. I'm not a centrist, but I'm a liberal, but I'm a conservative liberal. Let's just put it that way. So I don't know if you could say that, right?
You're a centrist. Yeah,
Am I
I
a
mean,
centrist?
you're a centrist. I think most of us have, Kimber. I think most of us in that vast middle
Yeah.
have points of view that might, depending on what the issue is, might align more with left leaning
Right.
thinking.
That's true.
And there are, I would say, progressive thinking. And then there's the same people could have other issues where they align more on a more conservative slant. And that's where we live.
That's true. But I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you before we run out of time about, so your book, what kind of response though? I want to know what kind of response you got.
Well, the book has been written. The book was written for Little House fans. I mean,
Right.
it covers more than that. It
Right.
covers the broad, sort of a broad spectrum of my life.
Sure.
But the book was written when you call the book Prairie Man,
Hmm.
we know who we're targeting with the
Sure.
book. So the book was designed for Little House fans now, and people who align in that area around the show. Look, I think the response has been really good. I'm very pleased with the response, and I've gotten so many nice comments on the book. I mean, if there's a bump from Little House fans, is that the book isn't enough about Little House. It needed to be more about Little
Yeah.
House. So, uh, so Kimbra, I've just sold a second book, and I'm starting to write it now.
Is it a
And
sequel or just a total?
no, it's not a sequel. Totally different book, but same element in the title. The title of the book is Living the Prairie Way, which is, if you think about that, this is exactly the conversation that you and I are having
Right.
about choices that we make. The book is about using Little House as a foundational part of the conversation. The book is talking about how we as a society deal with issues, or how we might better deal with issues than we are now. Again, this is targeted to people who love Little House. And the good news is that millions and millions of people love Little House. And so it's a very good space to be in. But it's going to, I think the book, I really love what Little House stood for.
Good.
What Laura's book stood for, and what Michael Landon's um, adaptation of the Little House books stood for. Michael's adaptation was broader than the Little House books, but the feeling, the spirit of it was very much the same. And I love how he did that. Little House gave Michael an opportunity to tell stories that mattered to him, that he believed mattered to families, to individuals who were living with challenging circumstances. And Michael did that. Michael talked to those people with Little House. Look, it wasn't for everybody. It wasn't like there were big audiences. I mean, Little House regularly had audiences of 15 to 20 million people a week. It was a huge audience, but that was part of that era.
Right.
No one gets those kinds of audiences anymore unless it's the Super Bowl. And there are no numbers like that.
Part of it, don't you think, is because there's so much, like, you go on Netflix, it's so widespread out. Like back then.
Yeah, no, we don't. That's the very point. I mean, there is not a common watching ground now.
Right.
Where network television, when we were doing Little House, was three in the early stages of a fourth network. I mean, you had this is why it was such a massively successful advertising medium. You had captive audiences, 50, 60, 70 million people a night watching television. They were watching different things, but they were watching, an hour of this on, and an hours, half hours through the course of an evening in prime time on three different networks. They drew sort of different audiences, or they tried to link the audiences together. A lot of strategy as to how schedules were planned to attract certain kinds of audiences that would attract certain kinds of sponsors. And it was a very, very successful system, in terms of delivering advertising to the American public. Television, network television, make no mistake about it, was an advertising medium. It wasn't an entertainment. Yes, it was entertainment, but the entertainment was the fill between the commercials. The commercials were paying for television.
Right.
Now we all pay for our television.
That's true.
With our streaming services and our cable, if we still have cable, if you're not streaming, we pay. A lot of the burden of the cost of delivering entertainment has shifted away from the sponsor to the consumer of the medium. So, that's changed a lot. And what's so fascinating about it is the way that this pie that was for a long time 3 pieces is now hundreds of pieces, to your point.
Right.
There's very little, there are very few things on television anymore that demand cultural conversation the next day. If you're,
Right.
and really everything is available all the time. So there is no next day. You are the programmer. If you want to sit down and binge watch an entire series, episode after episode, you can do that.
Right.
Now you're having a great experience, but one of the sad things about that, or it's just a factor, it's just a reality of it, is that you're not getting this shared cultural experience anymore. If you have friends that are watching the same things you are, then you can have conversations about those things.
Right.
But you don't have people who know each other in school or at work or whatever coming together the next day after watching something and talking about a specific thing that they watched on television last night. And there's a pretty good chance that a lot of people you knew were watching the same thing you were watching.
True.
We've lost that experience other than the biggest sporting events, which is really, games are things that have to be seen live, and those audiences are very prized now and very valuable. And that's why sports rights have become so expensive, because that ability to capture an audience at a specific day and a specific time, because that's when this game is a very big deal. And that really isn't true of anything else that we watch.
Right.
I mean, major news events, it happens, you're watching it.
Sure.
But in terms of sort of cultural experiences, sports are sort of the big thing for that now.
You're absolutely right. Hey, I wanted to ask you another question before we run out of time. I know you're producing now more. Do you enjoy producing as much as you did acting, or do you still like to act?
I haven't acted for 25 years, almost 25 years.
It's been a while.
Professionally, I've done, things, I've done little small things that are sort of private, that's fine.
Right.
But no, I haven't acted on television in almost 25 years, or in front of a camera really in almost 25 years. And in all honesty, I don't miss it a huge amount. I don't. Look, it's a nice fantasy to think, oh, wouldn't it be fun to do such and such? And I audition occasionally, but it's very anxiety provoking. And it reminds me of what it just takes me right back to that space where you are on the line when you walk into a room, or now when you send your tape to a casting director. No one walks in a room anymore, I don't think. I would much rather be where I am as a producer, where I'm sitting in front of my blank computer screen, writing fade in and writing something that will become something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think and I know that's what Michael Landon loved about it with Little House. That's what all writer producers love, is the blank page and the stepping in with an idea and getting to the end.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very big deal. And there's a lot of engagement in that, huge amounts of engagement. And I've come to feel like it's really the producers and the directors that have the most fun in our industry, because they're really in control of the content.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Actors are generally the last ones hired and the first ones done. Whereas the writer producers are there from the first initial idea all the way to the time it delivers. And for the most part, now there are changes in rules that are shifting that a little bit.
Sure.
But basically, the actors have the smallest part of the process. The actors get a very outsized degree of the portion of the credit for what happens. But there are so many other people involved. And I think that involvement under the hood where you're actually making it happen before the actors come in and after they're done. I have found that incredibly exciting and fulfilling, and I've just loved that.
And I've produced little things, and it's very empowering and creative in a different way, But
Oh
also
yeah.
for acting, film, and TV, like I was listening to Frances McDormand talk about it, and it's so true. She said it's really a editor's medium, because the editor makes
It's totally an editor's medium.
right.
It's a director's editor's medium. The director is choosing the shots, and he's working with an editor to craft the pace, the choice of every shot. I mean, when you see a performance that comes together in a film or television, the actor never gave that performance exactly as you're seeing it.
Sure.
I mean, that performance was crafted by an editor and a director.
Right.
No question about that. And there's so many things that can end up in a film where they weren't necessarily, the actor wasn't thinking, about this moment that this was going to, but in the context of something that's part of a scene that's being shot, and they have coverage of you in that scene, it's really reactions, which can be so interesting, where anything is usable. And I think that it's very, very powerful for those people who sit in dark rooms in front of monitors, scrolling through footage to find the way to make this moment, this scene, this show work from beginning to end. I think it's a fascinating process. And I think that, a lot of actors I know have no interest in understanding that process. They really don't want to know. They just want to think about the acting, which is really good. Because the other part of that, Kimbra, is that as an actor, you can't be the actor and the director at the same time. You can't be the performer and the critic. I mean, you know that as a singer.
Yeah, and even when I've done,
when you get out to sing a song, you just have to sing the song.
Sure. As any kind of art form, for me anyway, whether it's acting or singing, you have to be in that moment. And if you're judging yourself or thinking about technical stuff, it's just so
not good.
I'm not going to give a good performance, and you probably would agree with that,
I would totally agree with that. And we sometimes a great amount of the time, Kimbra, we don't know why something works.
True.
When you're performing.
True.
If it works, it works. And of course, you want to bottle it and keep it. And someone tells you that was great, you want to recreate it. But yes, look, when you work, say, for example, on the Broadway theater.
Sure.
And a show is set, the director's been there. By the time you're ready to open, this is the show. And the job of those actors is to come in 8 times a week and deliver that show.
Mm-hmm.
No changes, no adjustments. Stage managers are there to take out the improvements that actors try and, that just because performances evolve, stage managers bring it back to where it was set, because that's the tradition, that the director controls what is in control of what that presentation should be. But the reality is that once the curtain goes up and the lights come on, the actor's in control.
True.
I mean, you agree that you're going to do what you're going to do the blocking, and you're going to do what you've agreed to do, and that's what makes the show work. I mean, everyone on the stage and behind the stage, in the wings, up in the booth, they're all doing their show, and it all comes together, and it becomes this, if it's really good, it becomes this magical thing. And that's the discipline, is to present that 8 times a week, so an audience has a thrilling experience watching something. It's a enormous discipline as an actor to do that.
Yeah,
and for everybody to do that.
Yeah,
and to get this thing to come together cohesively, it's hundreds and hundreds of individual things that come together, maybe not exactly the same way every night, but very close to exactly every night to create this experience.
Sure.
And that's magical to be part of that process, because you are part of an overall plan, and you are doing your job that helps make that overall plan pay off.
Yeah.
And there's great there's a lot of satisfaction that comes from that, particularly if it's really good.
I totally agree. Now, Dean, I didn't expect you to be so, let's see, I said this already, but I didn't expect you to be so forthright and give me more information than I wanted.
Did you think I was going to lie to you for an hour?
No, but from what I saw you on your interviews, I'm like, okay, he's going to want to sell his book, No,
well, yes, we always want to look. Yes, I always want to sell Prairie Man, My Little House Life and Beyond, always. But listen, if you do show notes and, if you mention it in the show notes, then it's available from Kensington, and you can get it at Amazon, and you can get it at all the places you can get books, and it's an audio book and all these things. It's actually, if you say that, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too, Kimbra. This is, this is,
I totally,
that's fine.
I put stuff in the show notes, but it's funny because one of my good friends who I never thought was Little House on the Prairie fan, I didn't think he was, but he's like, oh my gosh, you're going to have Dean Butler on. He's a total fan, he's fanboying out on you, on me. And so I'm just thinking I'm going to get him the book for like some holiday gift or something, I'll get him your book.
Cool.
But
my publisher thanks you, and so do I.
Yes, yes, my future ancestors thank you.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I did want to say, because you were such a great guest, I'm hoping you'll come back when you have your new book. The one you were talking about.
I've been working with Harlan Bowl, and we can work that out. We can talk about the new book.
Yeah. Yes, for sure.
I think very few of us are really in our prime when we're in our prime.
That's true.
I think that comes later. Mm-hmm. And, that's one of the reasons why that famous old saying, youth is wasted on the young.
I know.
I mean, I think that's a big part of that. We don't really know what we are when we're in our prime. There are people who do, and those are exceptional people who really have a sense of what they are and who they are
and
at a very young age. But that's not true for most of us.
Yeah. I had a friend that I went to high school with that, or actually we didn't go to high school, but we were around the same age, and she was very driven, and she knew from the age of 17, and she focused all of her time 8 hours a day just playing piano. You know what I mean? But she knew from from that age, like, this is my prime. This is what I'm doing. And for me, I was always thinking, oh, I've got time. I mean, I was always driven and ambitious, but I always thought I had more time than I did.
Yeah, no, it's of course. And, the reality is that our lives are really such a blip in the overall. They feel long. We go on this journey that to us is a long journey, although the older we get, the shorter the journey feels.
True.
Because we have more context and perspective about it. But I mean, as a young person, you've got a certain number of years to make an impression, and you need to do it at a certain time in order, depending on what the career is. But I think, youth is valued in our culture. Youth has always been valued. Youth is the magic, it's the magic elixir. It's the future. Right. Youth is the future.
Right. That's true. And unfortunately, it's kind of ironic, but all of societies, not just American, because people didn't have as many kids, so the baby boomers and the Gen X and Y and now Z, but it's going to be older people and not so much younger people,
Well, I think and I'm not quite sure what's going to happen to change that, but I think there's probably, one, we know more about how to prevent ourselves from having children if we don't want that responsibility. But there's no question. I mean, we as a society, as a world culture, we're in a very challenging situation because we need youth
Mm-hmm.
in order to drive the culture forward. But I think we are hesitant because we look at our world and we see how challenging it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're asking ourselves, are we going to be able to provide what a young person needs? Am I going to be able to provide what my parents were able to provide for me? You know, I mean, I think there's a lot of that kind of questioning that goes on. Anybody who's, and there's so many people who do, but you know, when you're willing to step into raising a family, committing yourself to a partnership, a marriage, or it doesn't have to be a marriage, a partnership, and you're there and you're going to raise children, that's what a huge commitment that is. And to do that well, not obviously not an easy thing. We see a lot of people, we see a lot of mistakes being made with that because we see that more often. But you know, there are obviously people who do it really well. And you've got kudos to those people
Oh yeah,
who
and it takes
do
a
it
lot of
well.
time and energy,
Oh,
not just
time, energy, thought. Yes.
and
Yes.
I've noticed that with kids that when they turn out really well, it's like this parents spent a lot of time with them, you know.
Yeah. It doesn't happen by accident. There are always, look, there are always exceptional, extraordinary people who can overcome what would seem to be enormous adversity. And there are those people. There always are those people, but that's not people in the whole.
Right.
You know, the largest group of us benefit from being in loving, caring families and being raised by people who we can count on and trust. And it prepares us to be able to carry forward.
True.
And it's very tough when you see that people don't have that. And there are a lot of people who don't have that. And that's a very challenging place to be, not only for the person who didn't get what they may need in their youth, but for the society who has to cope with a lot of people who didn't get what they needed when they were younger.
True.
Very, very challenging.
Good point.
For the culture.
Well, on that note, I will say
that happy note, Kimbra.
I'll say Little House on the Prairie. We need to watch it to see family.
Yeah, I mean, Little House has been that safe place for people
right.
for years. It's been that place where people come and reset for maybe the family that they didn't have at home,
True.
but that they can watch on television. And it's been very powerful. Yeah. In terms of this conversation we're having right now, Little House has been an enormously powerful, positive thing for a great many people.
And like I said, it has this whole second life on Cozy TV, and it's probably on other places, like maybe Me. There's something called Me TV, I think.
Sure. There's Me TV, and of course the streamers. It airs on Amazon Prime. It airs at iTunes. It airs on Peacock. Do you know last year, and I'm just going to leave you with this, Little House celebrated its 50th anniversary last year.
I remember
Little House streamed on Peacock 13.3 billion minutes last year. That is the equivalent, Kimbra, of 25,000 years of viewing last year.
Wow.
There are people who are craving what Little House has to offer. And that more, as much as anything else, is the evidence to me that we did something really right. With this, that we were a part of something that was really good. And we have to thank Michael Landon every day for what he did to craft this show. And we have to thank Ed Friendly, who found the material and optioned it and believed in it and put it all together. These two guys, and I mean a whole team of people, made magic, and people are loving it. 50 years and counting. The second half century of Little House love has begun, Kimbra.
And you were part of that.
I'm part of it. You betcha.
Kudos.
Everyone who loves it is a part of it.
Yeah, we're part of the Little House on the Prairie family.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Dean, for coming on. And I just want to say I really appreciate you giving me so much information. You are.
Well, you could say, just Dean, stop giving me so much information.
Stop. No, no, it's good. But sometimes it's hard, as a host, you have to know when to like let the person talk and then, kind of direct them.
And when to try and slow them down.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, good luck with the writing of the new book, and I'm sure
Thank you.
Harlan will be telling us about it,
I'm sure he will too.
All right, thank you, and have a great rest of the day, okay?
Thanks, Kimbra.
You're welcome. Bye.